I'm going to do my a brief reading from my new book called Jerry Lewis Told Me I Was Going to Die. It's a collection of numerous essays. When I'm done, I will introduce the next speaker who will do a reading from her new book. It's called Enlightened by Defilement. It's a book of haiku poetry. I'll get into that shortly. Haibun poetry, sorry. And then she will introduce the next reader who will introduce the next intern. So I'm going to start with mine, and then I will introduce the next person. So this is an essay entitled Treading Water. Fat floats. You need to know that first, or nothing which follows will make sense. It also helps to keep in mind that I was once a skinny kid. It's hard to believe now, given that I'm currently just over 200 pounds, or 91 kilos. But scrawny best described me back in the day, at least until I ended up in a wheelchair. From that moment on, the weight just sort of stuck. During childhood, me and my friends ran, played, fought pretty much non-stop, from late June till early September. Only the hottest weather slowed us down. Copious amounts of well-sugared Kool-Aid and jumping through hose-mounted sprinklers mostly prevented heat stroke. And when the temperature rose beyond their combined cooling capabilities, there was always the river. Growing up, I loved the water. Like generations of Caperol youth, I swam in the local river, known to one and all as the Vermilion. The town's small but neat beach drew a crowd every summer. It was a mark of honor amongst Caperol's youth to swim unaided from the dock to the island and back, with bonus marks for anyone who could manage to remain underwater the entire way. I never managed that heroic feat, but I did get to the island on my own before age 8, coming up for air numerous times. And even took several levels of swimming lessons in those familiar waters, complete with official government-regulated certificate. These weren't modified for special needs either, no. These were the real deal, and I earned them the hard way, by shivering in my 2 small swim trunks. From the river, I took to spending an hour at Laurentian Hospital's therapeutically heated pool every week. Swimming formed the only fun part of physiotherapy. Starting at the age of 3, long before I even know how to pronounce physiotherapy, I ventured to Sudbury for my weekly torturous session. If you think your job is stressful, try motivating disabled kids. Let's just describe my sit-ups as half-hearted and my push-ups as laughably futile. Not one of those exercises ever mattered to me. I was just passing the minutes until I could escape to my happy place, the welcoming warmth of Laurentian Hospital's well-chlorinated pool. Being underwater made me happy. I found a stillness hiding beneath its surface. Calming loneliness embraced me. Call it serenity if you want, but in that bath-like water's ridiculous warmth, they kept the temperature at almost 90 degrees. All it needed was soap bubbles and a rubber ducky, really. It was just me, my heartbeat, and my burning lungs. I still remember my time in that eye-burning exercise pool fondly. It was the highlight of my week, and the only reason I ever attended physiotherapy. Swimming, unlike sit-ups or push-ups, was something I excelled at. In the water, it didn't matter that my muscles were weak. I swam like a porpoise, diving down to pop back up and spitting out mouthfuls of water. Since I liked to open my eyes, but didn't like the sting of chlorine on my naked corneas, I brought goggles to the pool with me. Sure, their oversized black and yellow headgear made me look like some sort of insect alien, but that never bothered me. The hour I spent in the pool belonged to me, and I made full use of every second to traumatize everyone around me. During my time in Laurentian's pool, I loved nothing more than to float face first, face down, arms and legs akimbo, fingers and toes splayed. Having taught myself how to hold my breath for nearly 2 whole minutes at an early age, it meant drifting across the water surface like an unmoving corpse and freaked people out. The fact that the pool's regulars knew and ignored my antics didn't help. Their casual indifference to that, quote, poor drowned crippled boy, unquote, only made the sight more shocking to newcomers. More than once someone panicked, jumped in, and pulled me out thinking I needed CPR. But no, I was fine. Better than fine. The pool was my sanctuary. Until one day, my happy delusions were despoiled. It shouldn't have come as a shock. The copious chemicals kept the water clean weren't added solely to annoy me. I never gave their presence much thought, nor the fact that it took many disabled swimmers long minutes to get help from the pool and into the bathroom. Long, bladder-bursting minutes some of them didn't have to spare. Just pee in a pool. Those were the 5 words that ruined everything. Hearing that allowance uttered aloud caused me to suddenly realize why the hospital added so much chlorine, and it wasn't for the taste. Swimming in that pool lost its shine for me after that. The water felt polluted, and I hung up my trunks. If only someone had offered me that vital piece of advice. Don't drink the water. Thank you. Okay, Vera Constantineau from Coppercliff is a former poet laureate of...
A former poet laureate. I was a COVID poet laureate, so no one knows who I am by sight anyway. I sit quietly waiting for breakfast. A low utterance announces his displeasure. He's unable to wait for a pancake to form a golden crust, for the indicator bubbles to begin to pop. Delia Smith, British chef and PBS star, has taught me this and more. Back when I was hungover and only capable of lying in and dreaming of food, prepared precisely, painstakingly, she was the go-to on Sunday morning. That word again as he rinses another streak of runny batter off the spatula. Sunday brunch. Profanity pancakes, a house specialty.
Actually here also to read from my debut novel, which came out in October through Latitude 46. And because I'm talking so much, I'm going to just go with a very short excerpt from this piece. It is historical fiction, so if you like history, maybe this is interesting to you. It's set partly in the Winter War between Finland and Russia in 1939-1940, and partly in Northern Ontario when oh, here comes the train. Who can win between me and the train? Partly in the Winter War of 1939 and 40, and partly in Northern Ontario. I might just wait for this train to go by, because otherwise, you know. So have a little break, have some water. This is like intermission. Or a cliffhanger. Okay, thanks for that intermission there. I think we'll get a few more minutes in before we get another train. So I'm reading from Sisu's Winter War, and as I was saying, my main character is from Northern Ontario, and she receives a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. So this is the opening. The sun streamed through the canopy of interwoven branches, dancing like the northern lights. Last fall's leaves rustled in the underbrush as a small creature scurried nearby. In the woods behind my house, I was myself again, breathing in the crisp spring air, ambling over rotten logs, and stamping through small patches of snow, the last vestiges of a too long winter. So I have the great pleasure of introducing our first, I believe were you our first poet laureate, Roger? Roger Nash.
It's very hard to watch the news, I find today, without feeling pretty miserable, because you see bombings from Ukraine, you get COVID news, bad weather hitting all parts of Canada, forest fires, floods in various places, and we can wonder, where do we find hope to rebuild after so much destruction? Here's a poem about rebuilding, an optimistic one. What can we expect will fill in the craters of missiles, howitzers and hand grenades? Rain, snow, dust, grass, some mushrooms, a one-legged bird. The future always as open as twisted doors dangling from the branches of trees. Rubble and victory parades negotiate with each other endlessly, clause by hidden landmine. Prisoner exchanges, an exchange of iron striking stone for stone on iron. Parents try to promise their children a done and perfect peace, but can even gods promise that? I remember my mother promised me, way back in 1945, end of the Second World War, she promised me a smaller but stiff-necked and obstinate hope for quite what she couldn't say. And the bird with one leg built a nest. So sometimes we plan to pick ourselves up, hopefully, and go on, but something happens that we haven't caused in nature or with other people's work, and we could wrap our minds around that. The bird's nest in the bomb crater is a start, perhaps, of some things getting better. Then your sudden, very articulate silence puts a brief pause in history to point out that the entire cosmos, not omitting a single cog or diaper, is just about me inhaling with you.
Fire based on the cover, and it's got snails in it. Eyes closed, Maria grips her safety harness and relaxes in anticipation. Even though she hasn't felt it in years, the shudder that passes through the shuttle as it docks with the orbiting shipyard is oddly familiar and comforting. She's quick to remind herself that it's not a reunion, but a reckoning. Unfastening her harness, she floats free from her seat. She grabs a handhold and coasts to a stop with the ease of someone who's been working in space most of her life. She watches Danny struggle with his own safety harness. His bright orange jumpsuit is conspicuous amongst the dull gray ones of the veterans like herself. "You need some help, kid?" "Nah, I got it," Danny says between grunts. Rookies are assigned orange so they'll be more visible. The intention is for more experienced people to watch over them, make sure they're not getting in over their heads. It doesn't work. Everyone just avoids the new recruits. If things go to hell, it's generally the orange is at the center of it. Unfortunately for Maria, she doesn't have a choice. Danny's harness releases and he stands too fast, pitching forward in the awkward half somersault. Maria reaches out and stops him, but not before he pushes her backward into another crew man lined up to disembark. The man, eyes wide and temper rising, shouts, "Stop shoving, what's your problem?" Maria glares at him. "No problem here unless you want one." The gangway of the orbiting scrapyard. She tugs on Danny's arm to keep him moving forward, but also to make sure he doesn't drift away. Conditions of her probation imposed by the company include mentoring a recruit and doing a stint with the reclamation and decommissioning squad that worked the orbiting shipyard. Wreck and deck was grunt work that they hadn't managed to automate. Prepping ships for salvage was dangerous and dirty work and not generally something people aspired to.
Rapidly every year in Canada. To some extent, the same could be said for the instances of recidivism, even though the percentages are not identical. The percentage of escalation for Indigenous women is tabulated between 32 to 41%, while the rise of all other women in Canada in prison is 34.
I'd like to introduce Emily. Emily Andrews was born in Sudbury, Ontario, but spent most of motherhood in Calgary. She has a BA in English and swears constantly. She talks about herself in third person on the back of book covers. Except when I'm reading them, right? Yeah, if you want to remove this.
Okay, I'm really doing this. Thank you.
Go, Emily.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to the Railway Museum for this. And I want to tell you guys a little story that has absolutely nothing to do with what's in this book. But I wanted to say thank you to the Writers Guilds. So in 2019, I started having symptoms of something called functional neurological disorder, which is why I get to sit in this lovely thing. I should dress it up a little bit. And I lost my desire to write. And the Writers Guild got it back. And that's why I have this out right now. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And I'm just going to read the introduction. And I do swear a lot, so I'm going to try to remember to use fiddlesticks instead of the F word. Okay, then okay. Fuck. I hated being a kid. I was never happy enough or fun enough to satisfy the adults. Other kids in my class could not relate to me because they said I talked too much like an adult. And now with my potty mouth, I talk too much like a kid. Go figure. When I was a teenager, my isolation became worse. I was an outsider among the outsiders because I couldn't be bothered to find the standard goth clothes to fit my ample waistline or do my makeup beyond lipstick and eyeshadow. There is work involved in fringe styles. The adults in my life threw the word phase around like a salt at a ritual, trying to summon a normal child. But man, do I wish I had the internet back then. I would have been able to go on social media app and find a group with common enemies. When I moved to a bigger city and started to go to university, I found my outsiders. My ilk whose members were all different in a different way. In comparison to some, I was now the immature one around the precocious intellect. I was dressed goth compared to hipsters. I was in a bigger pool with more fish, but I felt more seen. At times, I felt inferior to these people, but I never felt like the oddball. More because oddball became chic in a way, but it was a whole different subject unworthy of discussion. It wasn't even about having close friends or friends at all, really. It was more about having a few someones who you could see semi-regularly, who you could have a nice conversation with and smile at their presence. It didn't have to be intense or serious. It could just be nice. You learn that as an adult. Coworkers who bring a snack for everyone, who have a joke or encouragement not because they have to, but because it's nice. Movies and television shows celebrating teenagers emphasize the best friends for life. They have the center person that is almost to the exclusion of all others. Platonic relationships with other genders are impossible and will always end in a kiss, and what you do now will affect your whole life. So, if you have to cultivate your friends and cannot be seen with losers, you date for love for fear of being alone, you deny platonic friends because you can never really be part of that when love could just be around the corner. The teenager experience is written as a universal, as many archetypes are. Unfortunately, the people raising them and teaching them and walking by them are at the mall seem to forget that these are humans with feelings that are still learning. Being on the rim of social circles allows more clarity and perspective on the cultural of so-called young adults as a whole. We were all given a role to play and expectations to uphold with very little input. During university, I started to write more and take it more seriously and indulge in writing classes. During critiques, when I would present a story written from the perspective of a teenager, some people would tell me that the voice was not correct, and a teenager would never sound like that. My characters always sounded too old and educated for that age, whatever that was. Even without being specific, it was obvious that they were anywhere from 14 to 20. If a teenager swears too much, we tell them to stop using adult language. If adults use it, we tell them to stop being such immature language as an adult. Fiddlesticks. Now, John Green writes from the perspective of teenagers who have elevated interest in intellectual hobbies and is featured in the young adult section. Yes, I compared myself to the Fault in Our Stars guy, but just for this one thing. And overtly sexual vampires go to high school. Or maybe I'm the one who's completely off her rocker and doesn't get it anymore. Soon I will have a teenager who will proclaim I don't get it, who will not believe I can empathize with their emotions, who does TikToks with the same know-how and confidence as my mother who is trying to use her smart television. No, Mom, you won't get charged if you use YouTube. No, Mom, Netflix isn't broken. You have to create an account. The stories in the book are from that perspective, a role played by people trying to find themselves and occasionally having deeper thoughts and reading 17th century poetry for fun. The first 3 short stories were intentionally picked and are 3 fates. They have lives that suck but don't know how to vocalize it. How do you seek help when you don't know what you are feeling is not the norm? That is a trait that very easily carry into adulthood. The last is a bit of a bonus story that I was not sure I wanted to add because the character is on the older side of a teenager, but then I thought, who the hell knows what at an 18-year-old, or 25, or 50. Like we wanted more than a decade earlier in our lives, may every child in every generation learn, may we raise them better. Thank you. And I would like to introduce our final reader, Miss Jacqueline Denis. Jake the Poet has been writing poetry for over 40 years. She worked for Canada Post Corps, Windsor Police Auxiliary, and the Christian Horizons. She served with the 21st Service Battalion in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserve. Jacqueline has a BA in psychology and uses her knowledge to write in the genre of meditative poetry, spirituality, and encouragement. She is retired and lives in the beautiful community of Spanish, Ontario. This is her debut collection.
To start with the prose on summer. Summer's a time where each element is in balance and harmony. Water accumulates in clouds, bursts in storms, sustains plants, animals, and river-lake systems, then cycles back up in evaporation. The sun, now in full view, brings warmth and passion over his creation. Mother Earth responds by producing and renewing food, plants, and habitats. Lake Erie mirrors the sky. a glistening diamond blue reflection. Summer is a time to enjoy family, friends, coastal waters, nature, and sunsets. Nature helps build our best selves as we have time to connect and play. Summer is a reminder to balance and master our own lives.
I was saving up for university, and it was a job. It was 10 hours a day. It was almost everybody was an immigrant, including me. I've been only in Canada for 5 years. All the rest were Portuguese, wonderful people. And he's still there, she said, shuddering despite the heat. Come on, I said, there's nothing to be done. The authorities are bound to be here soon, now that I believe that. With a sigh, Amy came in from the balcony and perched on the side of the bed nearest the window, her bed. The ambulance is coming, the ambulance is coming. That's all they've been saying for the past 2 hours. She sipped her drink. Some damn vacation. I looked through the open balcony doors over the tops of a few ragged palms of the beach shimmering in the distance. I could see tiny figures running in the surf or lying on the beach. Everything seemed so oddly normal. Suddenly I remembered something. Claudio sat on the plane. Claudio and Angie had been sitting right across the aisle, newlyweds on their honeymoon. Didn't need a detective to figure out that even before Angie had announced that in that piercing, shrill voice of hers. And there'd been a smattering of applause, the kind usually reserved for the landing after a particularly rough flight. Always slow with the drinks, eh? When they're free, said Claudio.